Welcome to Illuminating Catholics, podcast of the Diocese of Sioux City. I'm Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese. Together with Carmen Bauer of the Faith Formation Office, we will shed light upon topics of faith in the modern church. Our guests include Catholic clergy, religious sisters, and other experts in their fields to help us understand what's happening in the church today. We will explore issues, even the tough ones, and to find answers to common questions about Catholicism. Thank you for joining us for today's Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Welcome back to the Illuminating Catholics podcast of the Diocese of Sioux City. I am Dawn Prosser, and I'm Director of Communications for the Diocese.
And I am Carmen Bauer, the Director of Faith Formation.
Thank you so much for listening, and we want to offer a big welcome to any new listeners to the podcast. We're so glad to have you with us. So it's well known that we have seen a decrease in vocations in the church in our lifetimes. As Catholics, we're often asked to pray for vocations, encourage vocations. You have young men and young women in our lives, whether it be for the priesthood or religious life. And today, a return guest, we have our Diocesan Director of Vocations, Father Travis Crotty. He's here to talk about vocations efforts in the diocese and especially some events coming up this summer. So we're so glad to have you back in the studio with us, Father Crotty.
Thank you, ladies.
Well, welcome back. Well, before we jump into the topic of our vocations, the activities coming up this summer, would you mind just catching up our listeners and reminding them where you're from and where you attended college and seminary?
Of course. I'm from Verina, Iowa, little tiny town east of Storm Lake. Went to Newell Fonda High School. Then I went to college seminary right out of high school, so I didn't go to a typical college. Went to Conception Seminary College with the Benedictines in Missouri. Went to Denver for 1 year. And then I went to St. Louis at Kenrick Seminary for 4 more years. I was ordained in 2020, and I've been in my role here, the Director of Vocations, for just finishing my 3rd year.
Wow.
In about a month or so. Yeah.
3 years already.
Yeah.
It's gone by quick.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, how have you seen yourself, in those 3 years, be able to develop more into that position? Obviously there's always that learning curve. How's that looked for you?
Yeah, that's it. And you guys were talking beforehand saying we're just going to figure out all of the issues and just solve the problem of vocations.
Right here in this podcast.
I've noticed, I think it was especially noticeable, maybe with COVID, but especially just for our diocese, the largest kind of group of priests retiring started to happen over the past couple of years. And I think with pastoral planning, but especially with pastoral planning kind of coming to more of a conclusion with a lot of the big mergers, a lot of priests retiring, I've just noticed a lot more people have been attentive to, the quote-unquote problem of vocations. And I've been able to encourage people a lot, saying that, and Father Shane will often share these different statistics about seminarians in seminary right now. Compared to other dioceses per capita, we have 9 seminarians now, and we'll be hopefully looking at 11 to 12 next year, which is exciting. And per capita to larger archdioceses that haven't really touched pastoral planning, and it's still very stretched, very thin, we're doing pretty well compared to some of the large metropolitan areas. But I say all that because I've noticed the awareness has grown, and maybe some of the fear has grown. So there's always a constant reminder and encourager that God has never left his church orphaned or abandoned, and God is always calling, and in my case, men to the priesthood. And we'll also talk about women to the religious life. But it's been difficult when there's been a lack of ordinations, and there's not as many priests. Or if there's only maybe one priest for a county now, your exposure to priests is difficult. But then what we all know is that our culture has become more secular. So in the past, when I talked to my grandparents about this, the faith didn't have to be passed on as explicitly. You could take your kids to Catholic school, go to Mass on Sundays, and the culture itself would kind of build up young people in the faith. We've lost that piece. So I have seen, though, a great increase in kind of evangelical zeal. I get to go around to most of our Catholic high schools, and I've seen the quality of the retreats that happen, the little class retreats, or we have a lot of exposure to the Steubenville youth conferences. And then these events that we'll talk about, I've continued to see those to grow. And I've continued to see young men, young women open to a relationship with God, open to a life of discipleship, and open probably more than ever in the past few decades to vocations, especially college campuses. It's hard as a vocation director in Northwest Iowa, where we don't have any state universities. We have a few private schools, but State University Newman Center campuses are like like just on fire right now, with great desire to grow in relationship with God, great desire to experience formation. College students praying holy hours in front of Eucharistic adoration, going to daily mass, experiencing a deepening love for Scripture and the sacramental life of the church. That's very encouraging to me. So the struggle and the reality is still there, especially when we see priests retiring in greater numbers than have been in the past, and maybe not as many men to replace them immediately. But we often talk about quality over quantity sometimes. And I've been really impressed with the young men who I've got to interact with. There's a struggle with different issues in the culture, different sins that are prevalent today, but there's great desire to serve the church more than ever. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, you do quite a bit of traveling through the Catholic schools, and I know you hit up several faith formation programs throughout the year at the parish levels. And, what's something that really impresses you about young people today? I think sometimes as we get older, there's it almost seems like a foreign world, right? But I would assume at the end of the day, there's still that same desire that calls to their heart, the same truth that calls to their heart, I should say. So, share a little bit about your travels and what you see in the young people.
Well, on the internet today, everybody loves to categorize everybody into generations. Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z.
Stuff.
Oh, yeah. But I will say, I've worked with high schoolers now for a long time as a priest and before that as a seminarian, and almost exclusively young people and high school students. Something I've really appreciated, and I often compliment young people today, high school students, college students, they're wildly authentic. And there's just no, they will either not go to confession or they will have the best confession of their life. Like there's not a lot of the in between. They'll either just not go to mass or they'll be really like consistent and even go to mass when their parents aren't going to mass. They'll either just kind of, so it's a struggle to see that, but it's like they're all in either direction, which is nice. So it's not very wishy-washy. So I've seen that those young people who are desiring something more and who have found the kind of secular culture that has been growing for a long time lacking, that they recognize that, no, there needs to be something more. And I've even seen in young people a deeper awareness, desire, love, appreciation for the traditions of the church, for the study of sacred scripture, things that I think even when I was a kid would have been seen as kind of silly. But I've even noticed at Newman Centers at Steubenville, whereas in the past would have said, oh, what do the kids really need? Because it's always adults saying what the kids really need. And there was an effort to try to make things more jazzy, to try to make it more fun, to make it more exciting, right? In the way conferences were given and the way talks were given, the type of music that was used, the kind of like flash and awe that was offered to try to attract. I've noticed that, well, that's still helpful for the kind of that like initial experience of the faith being something bigger than they know it to be. Students are almost enamored by the traditions of the church, and they have a great love for it. So they go to a Newman Center, and a fun example that I can think of is that the Newman Center at the University of Iowa was built at a certain time in the church when the idea of not having kneelers was popular. So people stood and they'd bow during the consecration. I went to a mass in the fall, and every single kid is kneeling. There's no kneelers and there's no kneeling pads. They're just kneeling on the floor. So there's a certain fervor that's there, that they really want to grasp onto something that's solid and that's lasting. And they see that in the church. I think it's being encouraged by some of their parents, especially by those who are forming them in the faith. Catechists, high school teachers, chaplains, priests, people in their lives who are inviting them to something deeper.
Yeah, and it's your work is not just even traveling and getting to know those young kids. It's also you're doing your best to offer opportunities, because discernment doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be a black and white thing. And so I'm excited today to hear a little bit about some opportunities coming up in the next few months for the young people in our diocese.
Because we've talked about how Father Travis will deploy himself out to different parts of the state, and even beyond our diocese.
Yeah, all over the diocese.
All over.
Back roads you've never heard of. Yeah.
You
guys have
gas
driven
mileage?
on them too. But,
oh, yeah.
Well, we got a diocesan car, so we're good.
Do you listen to our podcast then while you're driving?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Funny enough, though, so I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm driving. I really do sometimes. Don't have my own podcast to listen to anymore. No, I just
we miss
listen to my own. I'll listen to some of the longer ones, the longer form ones. I find that I actually end up listening to this one when I'm like kind of getting going in the morning or something like that. I'm excited by the different guests that you've had on, and it's fun to see a wide scope priests, of lay people across the diocese or even outside of the diocese. That's been fun. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been fun, and people keep saying yes. So it's and between the two of us, we just kind of brainstorm different things. So
with these events, I'll talk about these events.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Father.
I'll
So
talk about them.
in contrast to you being deployed out, there's a couple opportunities for young men and young women to deploy out to some different places. So let's start with the young women. June 2nd through 5th, exploring vocation of a religious life. Can you tell us more about the Ave trip, please?
Absolutely. I kind of have to talk about the Quest trip as well to talk about the Ave trip, only because in the Vocations office, people often will point out when we're encouraging vocations to the priesthood, which is the main job, right? What about the vocations to religious life? What about vocations to holy matrimony? What about vocations to consecrated life or consecrated virginity, whatever it might be? And it's always a tension. It's been a tension for me. I know in different dioceses they've tried different things. I know up in Milwaukee, Father John Burns actually requested from his bishop to have a particular job where he would actually just work to try to reinvigorate vocations to the religious life. But in my experience in seminary, it's been a great gift. I've been able to know many women religious, many sisters, many nuns, monasteries and convents, different varied communities with different charisms. And it's been difficult to come back to the diocese to recognize the great presence we once had of religious sisters, primarily teaching in our schools, right? Most towns have buildings that were convents. Some towns even had a couple convents, but even small towns. My town has really never been bigger than like 100 people, Varina, Iowa, and it had a convent full of sisters. And my great-grandma, who had a first cousin who was a priest, and who had two aunts, I think, who were both religious sisters. I think people of a certain age remember sisters in the schools, but then they don't really know where they went. So young people don't get to have an exposure to them. So there's been a great growing desire, growing interest among those who form our young people, catechists and priests, to see more exposure to religious sisters. That's happening at big conferences, at a Steubenville conference or a Sikh conference, for example. There are some sisters who are present, who are visible. Those who still wear a habit are a little bit more visible. You can know that, okay, those are a religious sister, and they have a particular joy. It's very attractive, right? So a few DREs in the diocese, through Carmen's office, said, hey, we want to have an event for women too. And so they're really generous to help plan this event. So traditionally, people always laugh at this, but I guess I'm just used to hearing it. They've called them nun runs in the past, right? Where
we like alliterations.
We love alliterations. Yeah, that's a little rhyme. Yeah, nun run, exactly. So the idea is that you take a group of young women and you try to visit a few different communities to see different ways of life, different charisms, different apostolates, different ministries, different ways that they live out their call to spousal relationship with Jesus in the church. So it's hard for us in Iowa because there's some communities in the surrounding states, but not exactly in our own state, that have the kind of these younger, vibrant communities that are particularly attractive to women, to young girls, to see a 30-year-old sister, a 25-year-old sister, a girl who's come right out of high school or college, who's discerning this call. So, June 2nd through the 5th, the first week of June, there'll be this a group of 3 DREs taking hopefully a large group of young women to Lincoln to visit a couple different communities there, and to do exactly what's helpful when you try to form anybody in the Christian life. It's not just about taking them to see convents. It's about living life together on a sort of pilgrimage, right? Especially in this Jubilee Year of Hope, there's a recognition of pilgrimage. So going somewhere together, leaving together, praying together, spending time together, sharing meals together, doing fun things together, hitting the outlet malls in Gretna. It's fun. But going to some other holy places too. The Holy Family Shrine they'll go to outside of Omaha and between Lincoln. But then to get to experience a couple different communities and experience their life, experience their vocation that's often not seen, especially in parishes or even in schools today.
That just sounds like a great trip. And one of your friends, Father Zach Jones and Deacon Dave Penton, took a group of women on a short trip. And one of the things he said is the women wanted to stay longer.
That's right.
And he says, well, go to the Ave trip. So
yeah, and I'll hype up Dolores, who's now in the Faith Formation office for that. Father Zach a couple of years ago was telling me about this trip they were going to take. The first one they did, and I'm like, did you just plan that whole thing? He goes, dude, Dolores.
That's amazing, yeah.
I'm just going, and they made it happen. Right. So they went.
Yay,
They
Dolores.
went last year to Minnesota, and I thought they were also going to Minnesota again this year, and then realized they went on the same trip. But I do know that some of the girls are considering going back to spend a little bit more time with those communities of religious sisters.
That's great.
Yeah. So I think what's been beautiful in my experience of bringing high school students together is I felt this way. I know a lot of other people feel this way. Feeling alone in your experience of the faith, even within a class in a high school, a Catholic high school, or a religious education program, or even within your own family. And this goes back to those themes of outcast Catholic that we talked about in our podcast, but finding yourself kind of alone. I don't have anybody to walk this journey with. Sarah Swafford, who gives talks to young people all the time, she often talks about having like a tribe of peers that you'd run with together. And a lot of young people don't seem to have that. So the hope and the idea is to actually bring young women from across the diocese together to recognize you're not the only young woman in the diocese who's trying to live out her baptismal call and follow Jesus more closely. And in so doing, you're not the only woman who's open to the possibility of religious life. I think that's the biggest thing when we offer vocation promotion opportunities, especially for young people. Like we talked in the last episode that I was on, the idea of going to seminary or visiting a seminary or talking to seminarians about their experience of life in the seminary and discernment, it's not just an automatic pathway to become a priest. That's not the goal. When I was in high school and I went to a Project Andrew dinner, Father Brad Pelzel, who was the vocation director, the first thing he said was, I don't want any of you men to become priests. And we're like, why are we here eating this dry roast beef at this random group of priests? What are we doing here? And he said, I want you to know what God's calling you to. And it was just a helpful proposal to say, what God is calling you to is what will bring, not always just happiness. It's exciting at the beginning, but will bring lasting joy, deep joy, abiding intimacy with God, and what will build up the kingdom of God. That's the hope. So that's the hope when we do any of these. It's not to just, let's find those girls who would make good nuns. It is, no, let's find girls who are actually walking with Jesus now, who are trying to grow in their faith, and would not only go see religious communities, but would do so in a community of young women in the diocese so that there's support to continue to grow as Christians.
It should be a great trip, and we'll have registration in the show notes. And then on the flip side, talk about your Quest trip, also held June 2nd through the 5th, heading north with some young men. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that trip?
Yeah, and I'm glad they're on the exact same week this year, which is wonderful. And I'm glad we could actually plan that. It worked out with everybody involved on both sides of these trips. This is something I received from Father Shane, my predecessor. I got to experience it as a seminarian and help plan it a number of years. But Father Shane had the idea. Probably some vocation directors often just steal ideas from other dioceses and kind of share different things that are helpful. But yeah, taking the men from out of the diocese and young men, high school and college age guys, and going somewhere together, right? And especially with young men, I make this comment all the time. I mean, it's like, girls have no problem just sitting down and talking to one another about things. They're more mature and not as awkward, right? Boys will just be sitting in a room and just bored out of their mind. And you just roll a ball in the midst of them, and somehow then they just start playing games, and then all of a sudden they're talking to you, right? I recently bought this little tabletop soccer flicking game that my priest friends had. I've had more conversations with students over the top of that, especially young men, over the top of this really silly tabletop soccer game, because it's just like the focus is on something else, right? So there's something particular with young men to face the same direction, shoulder to shoulder, tackle some kind of obstacle. There's a lot of different speakers and writers who've written on this, but we've gone to many places over the past few years. I think we've been doing it maybe 7-8 years now, this Quest trip. The original Quest trip was when Father Shane hosted a group going to Rome. He also lived in Rome for 8 years, so I'm not promising that I'm going to take a pilgrimage to Rome. Maybe someday. That'd be great. That's what guys like Father Zach are for, to take guys to Rome. But then after that, we've gone to the Black Hills. We went to Colorado a number of years, to Estes Park, and to hike mountains and to do things and to celebrate Mass and to pray. But I've noticed what's been exciting. So we'd always have Quest, which was more of a broad exposure to guys, meeting the seminarians, growing in relationship, much of what I said about Ave, growing in community with other men across the diocese. Then we would always have our Quo Vadis retreat. That was more intentional. It was right before the school year starts in August, focused on vocational discernment explicitly. But I noticed over the years that the type of guys who would keep coming back, they were coming back because they found community and they found a source of like really being built up in their relationship with God. And they would come back and they say, I need this experience every summer to help. I need to have a good confession. I need to have experience of praying with brothers. So that made me realize that maybe these two different experiences, opportunities don't need to be opposite, but can kind of feed into one another a little bit more. So we're staying closer to home this year, and we're going to Winona, Minnesota, which isn't as sort of like exciting. It doesn't have as much curb appeal as Colorado or like whitewater rafting in North Carolina. But what I really wanted to do was actually be able to visit the seminary with our own seminarians who are there. While the rest of their classmates won't be there, it's sometimes helpful just to see that, oh, this is just like a college dorm. Oh, this is a nice little chapel you guys pray. Oh, you actually go to college at a normal university, at St. Mary's University in Winona, Minnesota. Oh, wow, these bluffs really beautiful. What happens to be providential and helpful is that La Crosse, Wisconsin has this shrine to Our Lady Guadalupe that was constructed under Cardinal Burke's time as the bishop there in La Crosse. It's this beautiful church. People who know about architecture, is built by Duncan Stroik, a wonderful architect from Notre Dame University. It's a beautiful shrine. Our Lady Guadalupe, the patroness of our diocese of Sioux City, the patroness of the Americas, patroness of the unborn. We hear about her a lot. We almost exclusively associate her with Mexican Catholics, Mexican-American Catholics, but to know that she's our patroness, we're going to go on pilgrimage there as well. And then what we added last year to the Quest experience, which was a hit, was paintball. So
Spiritual experience.
It really was. It was a risk, but it was crazy. It was a lot of fun. So we're going to go to some obscure place in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, to play some paintball with the guys. But what we found to be beautiful is that the seminarians will take a lot of ownership of building community. All have an itinerary and morning prayers like 8 o'clock. And of course, seminarians, they just want to try really hard. So they'll wake up at like 6 and pray a holy hour. And you call it Coffice when you pray Office of Readings and drink coffee. So they'll have this whole group. They'll go do their own thing. So it's been beautiful to watch this community grow. When I've talked to some of our younger seminarians who've recently applied, they've talked about the benefit of spending time with the seminarians and realizing that these guys are normal, but they're also living a life that's different than mine. Their life is a lot like mine, but it's a lot different. And that's, I think, stirred up something a little bit more. So yeah, Quest and Ave are both happening on June 2nd through the 5th at the same time, so that communities can have something for young men, have something for young women, that can offer them an opportunity over the summer to grow in their faith outside of the normal routine, meet other young people from across the diocese who have the same desires, and to be open to discernment of the religious life, discernment of priesthood.
Well, and I think going back to, when, which I think it's just so wonderful that, you were able to stretch a little bit this year and add that Ave trip. I know that was a big commitment on your part as well as the DRE's part, and kind of you alluded to those conferences that the students go to. And just, message to parents that if they're not aware, when your child goes to a Steubenville conference, at the end of the event, they are asked to stand up if they are considering a priestly vocation, a religious vocation. And if you aren't there, you might not know your child stood up, and so you can always feel welcome to have those conversations with your children and, ask them, did God put anything on your heart, to say yes to him in a certain way in your life or to explore that? And as you, if you look at these events and you're like, oh, my child would never go to that, that they might not just want to, ask them, because you don't know if they've been on one of those trips, maybe they have stood up, and it's a great opportunity just to say, hey, would you like to check this out too? You get to, visit some communities. So I think it's just great to have that conversation between parent and children, and for parents to be aware that their children are their teenagers. They're taking steps towards their life choices, and the church has been proposing this to them in different opportunities in different ways.
Well, Carmen, you always do such a good job of bringing it back to the domestic church and the formation that happens in the family. Don't be afraid is what I want parents to hear, right? There's a lot of fear, especially today, because it feels even more daunting. I think in the past, when it was more normal to know somebody from your parish who went to seminary, to know a number of women who were either nuns, you had these aunts and whoever it might be, these friends, cousins, people from your class who they went off. It seems so daunting. It almost seemed like, and students from our diocese do, but it's like it feels like going to an Ivy League school. Oh, that would just be impossible. I could never do that. It's totally out there, like becoming like a master marble sculptor or something like that. I would never do that. But I know that there's a fear that comes to, oh, if I risk the idea of my son discerning the priesthood, my daughter discerning religious life, I won't get grandkids. I'd lose them. When you talk to religious sisters, when you talk to seminarians and priests, people are always attracted to the joy that they experience in them. Maybe not priests when they're celebrating 3 masses and grumpy on a Sunday afternoon. Yeah, but seminarians when they're young and excited. No.
Maybe not immediately after the Holy Week.
Yeah.
No, just kidding.
Sisters usually really joyful.
Yes.
And this is a difference, right? Because older folks will remember maybe the classic kind of stereotypes of nuns with rulers and discipline in schools and things like that. But to remember this life of commitment that they've given is a free choice. It's a gift that's been given away in love of the church, in love of Jesus, their bride, or for young men, for the priests to lay their lives down for the church, as Jesus laid his life down on the cross. That so often when young people actually experience meeting sisters or meeting young priests or seminarians, they're shocked by the joy. I don't think families often know that. Families are often pretty afraid to encourage young people in their vocations. An analogy is helpful of like, we know that marriages struggle. We know that people come from broken families, but that doesn't stop families from encouraging healthy and holy marriages and hoping that for their children. I think in the same way, we don't have as many religious sisters around. There's been a struggle of religious communities to either attract or to promote, or there's been a struggle of faith. But that doesn't stop us from inviting young people to consider a life lived in relationship with Jesus and his church in that particular way. Yeah.
And it's exciting that they do.
Yeah.
I've been encouraged just by some of the things going on in the trips and talking to you and Father Shane, and it's just encouraging for someone a little older to see that next generation being so excited about their faith and discerning that.
And I would just say this too, it's about planting seeds. This is about planting seeds, especially with young people. It's what's happening in the home. It's what's happening in parishes, in high schools, or in schools and in catechesis programs. We're planting seeds hoping that there's continuing formation that helps them to grow, right? So young women who come on this trip, they're not signed up to be nuns. Young men who go on this trip, we're not just trying to funnel them to seminary. We're trying to offer them a perspective of the church that's not often seen.
And they'll walk away with friendships that will encourage them in their faith regardless of how God is calling them to live their life.
That's
I still have close friends that I met on church trips in high school, and that was really formational for me. So that's a great gift you can give your kids by encouraging them to say yes to trips like this. And my goodness, when they're grown-ups, their life is boring. They don't get to do things like this. So take the trip.
Yeah.
Take the trip.
And I'll just say this. I'll just say this too, from a really generous benefactor, a lot of generous benefactors.
Yes.
The Vocations office, thank goodness, does not struggle with funds for our seminarians and for promotion materials, because people of the diocese from our seminarian appeal to different just gifts, extremely generous. I think they want to see the church continue to grow, which is wonderful. One particular gift, though, this year was given specifically for these two events. So they're pretty inexpensive for 4-day trips out of the state, with everything included, right? Everything's included, all the meals and all the travel and everything. The Ave trip is just $100 for the week, and then the Quest trip is $150. And we're taking a charter bus and hotel rooms and things like that. But considering how much things cost today, this is one of the more inexpensive trips.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
It is still going to be a sacrifice to go on something like this for certain families, but we hope that this helps more people be, attracted to it.
Well, in Knights of Columbus, Catholic Daughters, they're always happy to help assist young people.
Club.
Especially when they hear it.
Yes, Vocations.
Yes.
Yes, so don't
exactly.
be afraid to ask for assistance.
And the Sarah Club and the group out of Carroll that promotes Vocations. So they do some great work for you, for all of us as well.
Well, thank you so much, Father, for joining us again. We're kind of starting to cycle through return guests. We get so much fan mail that we just have to invite you back.
Sure.
People are going to get tired of me using that joke every episode. But thank you so much for coming and discussing with us vocations, but also the specific opportunities. I know that's a lot of work for you and your office, but I know that God always blesses our efforts and gives us more than we would ever ask or expect from them. So thank you also for all of our listeners. Thank you for following, and just make sure if you haven't already to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Follow us for more episodes on topics of the Catholic faith. For more diocesan news, visit lumenmedia.org.